It's my third year as Felix Lawrence's apprentice. On the day after the college entrance examination, he held the school beauty's hand and stood in front of me. Lila Shaw, didn't you say that I was foolish and would never find someone I could truly love? But now I have found it. The girl kept her head down the whole time, pinching Felix's slightly bent little finger and tickling it gently. Felix could only helplessly spread out his 5 fingers and let her do it. Very novel. It was the first time I saw Felix tolerate someone touching his hand. Nodding, I whispered, "Congratulations, then." "Congratulations to me too. Finally, I don't have to be his little follower anymore and can leave this home." I thought my story with Felix would end with this summer, but I didn't expect that when we met again, he would have red eyes and a very uncomfortable voice. "Lila, are you really going to abandon me like this?" 01. "Felix, can you please ask that Lila to go away? I can't let go of her when she's around." "What, are you jealous? Isn't it more exciting to have a genius student guarding the door?" Soon the sound of kissing was heard. The tip of my pen paused and I came back to my senses, only to find that I could no longer focus. With a light sigh, I put away the math test paper. Something wasn't right tonight. In the past, after Felix finished chatting with someone, they would whisper in each other's ears for a long time before coming out to call me. I was still immersed in a math problem and had no time to pay attention to him, which made him so angry that he kept cursing. I don't know what he is angry about. Do I have to be like the maids who guarded the bed in ancient times, and wash and wipe their mouths after the master is done? "Well, Felix, you bit me." "Shut up." Felix's condition didn't seem right today. The girls protested. With another sigh, I looked up. The dark night sky is dotted with stars. There are so many of them, and I don't know which one is grandma and which one is aunt. My eyelashes trembled slightly, and something flashed before my eyes. Is it a shooting star? Didn't someone say that? Seeing a meteor falling into the sky means that an outstanding talent is disappearing in this world. I suddenly felt a little empty. Glanced at the classroom. Through the crack in the door, Felix buried his head in the girl's neck, his eyes as cold as spring water, as if he was trying hard to vent some emotion. Looking away, I pursed my lips and smiled softly. Why bother? After packing up my things and putting on my school bag, I called out softly, "Felix." The movement inside stopped immediately. "I'm leaving now. I have something important to do tonight." "Felix, she's so annoying. She can just leave if she wants to. Why did she even bother to tell you? I wonder if this nerd likes you. He usually pretends to be a cool and good student, but he might be spying on you in a perverted way behind your back. When he is kind enough to watch the door for you, he might turn around and report you to the teacher." With a cold sneer, I turned and left. As I walked out of the teaching building, I heard a light behind me and the security guard shouted, "Who's in there? I wonder if they will be able to escape successfully this time." 02. It is always wet, cold and rainy during the Qingming festival. When we arrived at the cemetery, it started to drizzle again. When my uncle was choosing a cemetery for my aunt, I asked him to help me move my grandmother's grave from her hometown. The land in my hometown was sold and divided up by my uncles a long time ago, and I don't want my grandmother to die in unrest. I glanced at my grandmother and then at the aunt next to me. I just sighed and sat on the ground. In previous years, I always had a lot to say to them. This year I don't know what to say. Maybe I feel guilty. I promise, but I always failed to do it. I promised my grandmother, but I didn't take good care of Felix. He promised his aunt, but Felix did not grow up to be what she expected. I thought I could save Felix, but it seems I failed. 03. My parents died in an accident, and I have lived with my grandmother since childhood in a remote mountainous rural area. When he was 14, his aunt suddenly appeared with Felix. As soon as she saw me, she hugged me and said that she was her mother's good friend and was unable to help us in time because she was sick. Now that she is better, she wants to take care of me for my mother and take me to a big city to go to school and live. I refused and was a little scared. My mother is a typical rural woman. How could she know a friend like her? But my grandmother dragged me into the room and tried to persuade me earnestly. I still refused. She was irritated by my stubborn behavior and started hitting me with a broom. I ran to the back hill and hid there, crying, feeling wronged. Felix followed. He was the same age as me with bright eyes, red lips and white teeth. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking down at me like a god. I heard that you are always number one in your grade in every exam? I nodded. He raised his eyebrows and chuckled. That's nothing. The last student in our school probably has a higher score than you. At that moment, embarrassment, shame, and inexplicable unwillingness all flooded my heart. There is also a hint of anger. So, do you think your grandmother can be responsible for your future life? Can you? Just this short question made my emotions, which had reached the limit, plummet to the bottom in an instant. Can I? The most promising person who has appeared in the village so far is just an undergraduate student from an ordinary university. Wasn't he once a promising and hard-working person in the eyes of his teachers and classmates? Not all efforts will be rewarded. At that moment, I suddenly understood something. 04. I returned home, found my grandmother and aunt and said, I want to leave here and go to school outside. At least I want to make a name for myself and let my grandma live a good life. When I left, I always remembered what my grandmother told me. She said that her aunt is my lucky star, so her child is also my lucky star. I must be grateful and help my aunt take good care of him. So when I went to Felix's house, I was always eager to get him to study with me. After coming here, I learned that he was a talent in the competition class, and his only weakness was Chinese. In my opinion, at least that was all I could give back at the time. Although Felix was reluctant, he still listened to my long speeches with a cold face. Until I entered high school, Felix and I got along quite well. When did this all start to change? A few nights, I ran into my aunt and uncle arguing over the smell of an unfamiliar perfume. Every time I heard it, Felix would appear and stand behind me, with a terrifying indifference in his eyes. Does it make you feel better? I feel like I'm nothing special. I swear I never looked down on him. I just feel a little sorry for him. But what completely changed Felix's personality was the death of his aunt during the spring festival of his freshman year in high school. After countless kidney dialysis sessions, the day came when my body finally couldn't take it anymore. My aunt was lying on the hospital bed, barely breathing and calling out my uncle's name. Felix stared with his red eyes wide open, turned around and rushed into the heavy rain without saying a word. He found the man who said he was on a business trip and couldn't come back for the new year. The woman in his arms, touching her bulging belly, excitedly discussed with the man what to name the child in the future. Felix was devastated after witnessing all this. He stepped on the accelerator and tried to run over the woman who had destroyed his family. It's a pity that God didn't want him to commit a crime. He didn't knock the person away, but he was knocked away first. Fortunately, the driver braked in time and his life was not in danger. Only the little finger was crushed under the motorcycle, leaving it twisted and deformed. When Felix woke up after his aunt's funeral, he seemed like a completely different person. He spent the whole day hanging out with the guys from the technical school, smoking and fighting, and occasionally going out for some unconventional racing late at night. His uncle was so mad at him that he ignored him for a while. I'm terribly afraid that he'll get injured again one day. I followed him every day and kept a close eye on him. People around him joked that I was a passionate and miserable bootlicker who couldn't get the love he wanted but was willing to throw himself into the fire. I don't care about those people's opinions. Felix didn't care at first, until he saw me being followed by a pervert in the middle of the night because I lost him, and he held me down and almost molested me. He picked up a wooden stick and had a fierce fight with the man. Not only did he lose a back tooth, but his little finger was also injured and bent for the second time. I was so scared that I clenched his fallen teeth with one hand and gently touched his little finger with the other hand, thinking that this would soothe his pain. Then she cried until she broke down, begging him in extreme sadness. Felix, please don't hurt yourself anymore. Felix looked at me absent-mindedly, then licked the bleeding corner of his mouth and smiled nonchalantly. Okay, but from now on you have to follow me no matter what I do until the day I get tired of it. When my grandmother died, she held my hand and said, Our Lila is a good child. You must help your aunt take good care of Felix. When my aunt died, she held my hand and said, Lila, can you help Auntie take care of Felix? So I raised my head and said firmly, Good. 05. When I got home, Felix was standing at the door. So you did this on purpose? I didn't understand, so I didn't respond and took off my shoes to go upstairs. Why, you're really jealous. You can't stand seeing me being intimate with others, so you turn around and report it. Felix blocked me, a playful smile on his face. I don't know if it was because he had just returned from the cemetery and was in a bad mood, or if he was unhappy that Felix had deliberately forgotten about today. I suddenly felt that the smile on his lips was extremely dazzling. Felix, do you think you're funny? During the days of worshipping Auntie, if indulging yourself in pleasure can alleviate some of the pain, then I advise you not to do so. Because if Auntie knew, she would be even more upset. Felix's face suddenly darkened and he waved his hand to knock down the vase in the entrance hall. The flying debris scratched his little finger, and his whole hand was shaking violently. I suddenly remembered that it was raining today and his little finger must be hurting deep in his flesh again. I immediately ran over and wanted to wrap his little finger in my palm like I used to do, and then rub it gently, hoping that this little warmth could ease his pain. Felix pulled his hand away and sneered. Lila, don't you think you really behave like a dog? My spine stiffened and my heart felt inexplicably sad. A surge of emotion suddenly rushed to the top of my head. I lowered my head and said in a trembling voice, Felix, I think you're hopeless. Looking up, there is a warmth stirring in the bottom of my eyes. Really, just live your whole life in confusion like this. There may be countless girls willing to love you, but you will never find someone who can truly love you. Some people have lost the most important love in their lives, but they continue to attract others to love them by hurting themselves. Thinks he is very great. It is actually extremely stupid. 06. Ever since that night, Felix and I seemed to be stuck in an awkward Cold War atmosphere. He no longer let me follow him. I didn't refuse since the time was coming anyway. I sincerely advised him. There are only 2 months left until the college entrance examination, but I still hope you can take responsibility for your own future. He once said this to me. I hope that this time he can turn back from his wrong path. When Stella came to see me in the morning, I thought she wanted me to help bring something to Felix again. Stella is the school beauty. She is good-looking and good at studying, but his whole mind was on Felix. Felix was caught smoking and fighting, so she went to the school ethics supervisor to plead her case and begged him not to give her a serious warning. When Felix was caught skipping classes to pick up girls, she stood up to testify and said that he just had a headache and went to see a doctor. Even when Felix got 0 points in the exam and even the teacher gave up on him, she would stay up late to organize his study notes. Lila, I came here to ask you for advice. Consult. Stella blushed suddenly. Well, Felix talked to me and said he wanted to know more, so he came to ask you. I was speechless, but I still couldn't bear to reject her. Tell her everything Felix likes and dislikes. Stella took notes carefully. In fact, I wanted to tell her several times that Felix might have just said it casually to respond to her. But as soon as I met her clear and sincere eyes, I swallowed my words back. There was not much time left before the college entrance examination, so in order to prepare for the final sprint, I applied for evening self-study. When I went home that night and told my aunt not to cook dinner for me anymore, Felix didn't go out for fun for the first time. Hearing what I said, his face darkened. Why, now that you're no longer a follower, you immediately become wild and don't want to go home at night? I explain. The college entrance exam is coming up soon. I just want to go to the evening self-study class and take the opportunity to do a few more questions. Felix's expression softened, but his voice remained cold. Give me your notebook. I paused, looked up, and was a little surprised. He dodged unnaturally and urged, hurry up. After taking 2 steps, I remembered that I had circled the questions that were easy to make mistakes or difficult in each set of mock test papers, and made notes to explain them to him. He has a good foundation and was once a potential contestant. Compared to taking study notes, practicing exercises may be more suitable for him. There are some mock exam papers I left in your room. Go take a look at them. After saying that, I glanced at the time and hurriedly put on my shoes and prepared to leave. Lila, are you going to apply to S University? I paused and shook my head. No, A is better. After a moment of silence, Felix growled, get out of here right now. I was used to his moodiness, so I nodded and pushed the door open. I once said that I wanted to apply to S University because my grandmother and aunt are there and I couldn't bear to leave. But now I don't want to. 07. 2 months passed quickly. And the college entrance examination was here in the blink of an eye. After staring at my phone and hesitating for a long time, I gritted my teeth and sent a WeChat message to Felix. Good luck on tomorrow's exam. During this period, I saw him and Stella sitting in the library several times, encouraging each other and studying hard. Perhaps Stella really made him come back to the right path. 2 days before the college entrance examination, the weather was pretty good, neither hot nor dry. But on the third day, it rained heavily and the temperature dropped suddenly. During the exam, I was distracted several times. I wonder if Felix's hands will hurt so much that he can't write. After finishing the last exam, I immediately rushed out of the examination room and looked for that familiar figure in the crowd. Our eyes met and I paused. Felix walked towards me with a smile. I saw Stella holding his arm with the same happy smile on her face. They stood in front of me, fingers interlocked. Lila, didn't you say that I was foolish and would never find someone I could truly love? But now I have found it. Felix held Stella's hand tightly and shook it. Stella kept her head down the whole time, pinching Felix's slightly bent little finger and tickling it gently. Felix could only helplessly spread out his 5 fingers and let her do it. I noticed their little movements. There was a moment of confusion before my eyes. No one had ever touched his hand so easily. Seems that he has really changed. Maybe it will get better. I came back to my senses and nodded. Congratulations, then. Congratulations to me too, because I finally don't have to be his little follower anymore, and can leave here as I wish. The slight sense of guilt in my heart also disappeared. 08. The day I received the admission letter, I talked with my uncle for a whole night, and I quickly moved out of that home the next day. Felix and Stella were still traveling and didn't know I was leaving. I didn't tell him. I didn't even tell him that I didn't get an A in the exam. I changed my phone card, deleted all Felix's contact information, and cut off everything related to this place. I thought Felix and I might never meet again in this life. But I didn't expect that 6 years later, when I was invited back to the university to give a speech at the school anniversary ceremony, I would see Felix sitting next to the leader. He stared at me, with a sharp light hidden in his cold eyes, as if he was trying hard to suppress some surging emotions. Under his relentless gaze, I managed to finish my words. Just as I was about to change my high heels backstage, Felix showed up. He grabbed me, and no matter how hard I struggled, I couldn't get free. Felix let go. I walked too fast and my heels were rubbed raw by the ill-fitting shoes. I bent my body with a somewhat painful expression. Felix noticed and stopped immediately. He squatted down and reached out to touch my feet. I subconsciously took a step back. Felix's hands froze in midair. He lowered his head, and it was unclear what emotions were on his face. I quickly took off my shoes, calmed down, and said, "Felix, why are you here?" He didn't respond. "You just behaved very." Before he could utter the word unreasonable, Felix stood up suddenly. Before I could react for even half a second, he lifted me up with both hands and carried me on his shoulders. Felix took me to a stone bench and put me down, squeezing my ankle despite my attempts to break free. Seeing the blisters there, he frowned. "Is there any water in the bag?" After 2 seconds of silent stalemate, I gave in and nodded. He took my bag, found a bottle of mineral water and opened it to rinse my wound. As if he thought of something, his tense brows relaxed a little. Felix fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a Band-Aid. He tore off the film, and as if afraid that I would feel pain, he blew gently and approached cautiously. I stared at the cute red Hello Kitty Band-Aid and my eyes were dazed for a few seconds. As far as I can remember, Stella seems to particularly like this kind of cute things. Every time she handed me something for Felix, it would have a cute sticker on it. There are capybara, little dragon, loopy, and of course the most popular one is Hello Kitty. Move your gaze upward. His eyes fell on Felix's cold and hard jawline. Still so handsome and good-looking. I wonder if Stella would be like his previous girlfriends, who couldn't help but cover her hands devoutly every time they kissed. Then she obsessively hopes that this man will fall for her. 09. A bell rang. Felix took out his cell phone and frowned as he looked at the word Xian jumping on the screen. I quickly pulled my foot back and stood up, saying politely, "Thank you, see you someday." Then prepared to leave. But I don't know how I offended Felix again. His expression was as stinky as if he had stepped on dog shit. He stared at me intently, and his hoarse voice trembled slightly. Lila, say it again if you dare. Oh, thank you. I'll have a chance sometime. I looked up and was shocked to see Felix's eyes suddenly turned red. She grabbed his hand and asked, Is your pinky finger hurting again? But the weather forecast didn't say it would rain today. Lila. The body suddenly froze. It seems like it's been a while since anyone called me like this. My grandma would call me Lila in her soft hometown dialect. My aunt would call me Lila with a gentle smile. As for Felix, when our relationship was not so strained before, when I forced him to write an essay, he would stick out his back teeth and deliberately lower his voice, as if he was angry and teasing. Lila, you're becoming more and more courageous. The cell phone kept ringing. I immediately gathered my thoughts and let go of his hand. Felix stopped me from pulling back, hung up the phone irritably, and pressed the power button. He grabbed me again, lifted me up and carried me to an empty classroom. Then he pushed me down on the chair and stared at me. The red corners of his eyes looked like they were stained with cinnabar, making him look extremely pitiful and charming. I never dared to look Felix in the eye, because I was always afraid that he would see a changed version of me. Felix saw that I was deliberately dodging, so he clamped my chin and forced me to look at him. Eyes met. We just looked at each other stubbornly, neither of us speaking first. To be honest, I think the way we are now is a bit weird, even a bit stupid. I sighed and was defeated again. Felix, let's talk. He was just mad that I disappeared without telling him. The hand on his chin just relaxed for a moment, then tightened again the next second. Felix opened his mouth several times, wanting to speak, but finally his shoulders sank, and he dropped his head weakly on my shoulders, his voice extremely uncomfortable. Lila, are you really going to abandon me like this? Just like my mother did. 10. The body is stiff. A thick and sour feeling arose in my chest, making me feel uneasy and blocked. It turns out that Felix still hasn't forgiven his aunt. He always remembered the painful face of his aunt as she was on the verge of death, calling out to that ruthless man. Felix hated his aunt for loving a man so lowly, and also hated her for leaving him like that. Actually, it's not like that. Auntie really loves him. She would imagine his future and regret that she could not be with him until the end. She always cared about Felix the most and left him precious things. But he doesn't know. I reached out my hand, held Felix's head, and gently stroked him to comfort him. Felix, actually Auntie. Felix. A voice suddenly jumped out. Stella appeared and stood at the door of the classroom. I was so scared that I immediately pushed Felix away, looking guilty and flustered. Felix was very calm. He slowly pushed me back to the chair, then squatted down to put on my shoes and said, I'll have someone send you a pair of flat slippers later. Don't wear shoes for the next few days. I immediately struggled to break free and tried to jump up. Be careful. Stella passed Felix and trotted over to me, holding me up, frowning slightly and saying worriedly, How come it's so badly worn? But I brought myself a pair of flat shoes today, and they come in handy. Stella took out a shoe bag from her bag and handed it to me. When I met her smiling eyes, I was a little dazed. She still loves to laugh, and the dimples on the corners of her mouth are enough to attract everyone's attention. My sight flickered and I strayed away unconsciously. A strange feeling of stealing arose in my heart. But I didn't do anything, did I? I straightened my back and met her gaze. Her eyebrows raised and her smile deepened. Lila, it's been a long time. When I saw you in the audience just now, I was surprised for a moment and thought I was seeing things. Then when I saw Felix looking for you, I knew I was right. After saying that, she looked at Felix, curled her lips helplessly, and her tone was a little complaining. You walk so fast. I asked you to wait for me. You were anxious to see your old friend. I was anxious to see him too. She naturally took Felix's arm, just like she did before, interlocked their fingers, and then wrapped her whole hand around his little finger. I noticed the sparkling little diamond ring on her ring finger. It seemed a bit dazzling, so I turned my head and looked away. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Felix pulled his hand away unnoticeably, frowned, and rubbed his brows lightly, seeming tired. Stella wrinkled her nose and snorted. It was a very simple conversation, but the atmosphere was surprisingly tacit, like a young couple who have been living together and in love for a long time. It felt like there was an invisible wall between me and them. Shaking my head and smiling, I took the liberty to interrupt. I didn't expect to be so lucky today to meet two old friends at once. I have something else to do at school, so I'll go take care of it first. We can catch up next time we have a chance. Pretending not to notice Felix's following gaze, I lowered my head to put on Stella's shoes and said something again. Stella, thank you for the shoes. I will return them to you in a couple of days. Then he quickened his pace and left. After coming out, I sighed heavily. It would have been better if I hadn't said the last sentence. Her contact information had been deleted along with Felix's 5 years ago. He glanced at the expensive shoes on his feet. Forget it, they rich people don't care about a pair of shoes. Today's meeting was just an accident. 11. After greeting the school leaders, I dragged my tired body back home. As soon as I drove into the community, the security guard stopped me. Miss Shaw, this is something sent by a Mr. Fu. The errand boy said he couldn't contact you, so he left it with me. I took a look at the logo on the packaging, and it was the same brand as the pair of shoes Stella handed me. I don't know how Felix knew I lived here. On second thought, he could sit next to the school leader, and getting my address would only take a word. Take it first, and I put it on the passenger seat. When I got to the room and plugged in my phone, more than a dozen missed calls popped up. My forehead was throbbing, and the next second my phone vibrated. Same number. I just stared at it quietly until the sound disappeared. Soon, a new number popped up immediately. The same place of belonging. After hesitating for a few seconds, I picked up the phone for some unknown reason. Hello, is this Lila? Stella's sweet voice came out. My fingers trembled slightly and I said, Are you free this Saturday? Let's meet up. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about Felix. After a few seconds of silence, I responded, Okay. 12. Stella arrived earlier than me. When she saw me, she stood up and greeted me warmly. There is an experimental project in the institute waiting for me to discuss when I return. As soon as I sat down, I said, Sorry, I have a meeting later, so I may not have much time. I took out the specially cleaned shoes from my bag and handed them to her. And your shoes. Thank you for last time. Stella just looked at me like that and smiled faintly. Lila, let's compete fairly. I was stunned. She continued, Felix. We'll give him a fair fight. I hiccuped in fear and immediately explained. Stella, you misunderstood. What happened yesterday was not what you thought. Felix just saw that I had trouble walking, so? Lila, why did you leave in the first place? Stella stared at me with heavy eyes. Although she was smiling, the smile did not reach her eyes. You didn't get into University A, but ended up in University P, which no one expected. After a moment of distraction, I looked out the window. The originally clear and bright sky was suddenly covered with a shadow. It looks like it's going to rain. But this is a hot city, and the sticky water vapor evaporates without a trace before it can penetrate into the hem of clothes. Yeah, no one would have thought I would come here. Children in the water town are accustomed to the wet lingering. But I don't like it, not at all. I am afraid whenever it rains. I was afraid that Felix would toss and turn in bed and growl because of the pain in his hand. I was afraid that his eyes would become so dim as if they had lost all the light and he would become a dying corpse. Here, the bright sunshine will penetrate into every corner of the body, and all the hidden darkness will be expelled and disappear without a trace. Retracting my gaze, I pursed my lips and smiled. I like this place. I don't like the rain. Stella nodded. Felix doesn't like rainy days either, but he chose to go to university, a city that loves rain the most. My eyes were shaking and I quickly lowered my head to hide my panic. Calming myself down, I stared at the ring on her ring finger. A lot has changed in 6 years, hasn't it? Stella noticed and raised her hand and waved. It looks good, right? I think so too. That's why I bought it for myself. My body suddenly froze, and I was a little bit unbelievable. You. Stella pursed her lips and forced a bitter smile. It's a bit silly, but who told me to like him so much? I wore it on purpose just to remind him that I have always been the one who stayed by his side all these years. I also want to remind those women who have feelings for him. Tell them that Felix is mine, but I always forget that you are the most powerful one. I accompanied Felix to P this time to discuss cooperation. The moment he saw you, Felix lost his mind. I knew how destructive Bai Yueguang was. So Lila, let's compete fairly. After all, I find that I don't seem to be suitable to be a vicious woman. Teen. On the way back, I couldn't concentrate and was distracted several times while driving. Finally, I had to park the car on the side of the road. All I could think about was what Stella and I said. She said that after I left, Felix looked for me everywhere like crazy, but it was as if I was hiding on purpose, leaving no trace at all. Even when he asked a private detective to investigate, they only found out that I had gone abroad. But who could have thought? I never went abroad and stayed in this land. Yes, for someone as resourceful as my uncle, it would be so easy to hide one's traces. 14. I met Felix again at a seminar where he appeared as an investor. Seeing his calm demeanor, I knew he did it on purpose. He deliberately found my unit and offered to cooperate. After 6 years, Felix has become so smooth that he can get everyone at the dinner table drunk with just a pot of tea. Even when several leaders were drunk, he was still considerate enough to call a designated driver and watch them leave one by one. Yes, in just 2 years, he successfully occupied a place in the business world on his own. There are many news reports about him on TV. After sending the last person off, Felix came over. Come on, I'll call a car to take you home. I shook the car keys in my hand and declined. Thanks to you, I didn't drink a drop of alcohol tonight. After opening the car door and getting in, Felix came to the other door and jumped into the passenger seat. He quickly fastened his seat belt, looking as if it was a matter of course. Well, I just had a few sips of wine, so I'll have to trouble you to take me there. Although I felt helpless, I still nodded. Consider it my thanks for him blocking a few drinks for me tonight. Clicking on the navigation, I asked him, "Address? You're home." I was speechless and said a little irritably, "Either tell me an address and I'll take you back, or you get off and go back by yourself." Felix didn't say anything. He took off his glasses, rubbed his temples, looked very tired, and said in a hoarse voice, "Lila, I'm really a little tired. Can you let me take a nap first?" Before I could refuse, he closed his eyes. The thin moonlight from the window hit his face, flickering like a candle flame in the breeze, jumping back and forth between reality and illusion. He seemed really tired. His nostrils twitched slightly and his stern face softened, but his star-like eyebrows remained tense. With a light sigh, I reached out my hand to smooth them out, but when I was about to get close, I stopped. I used to be his little follower. Whenever he had a conflict with his uncle, went out for a wild party and came home to collapse on the bed, I would wait quietly by his side. Then, when he dreamed of painful memories and looked extremely miserable, I would reach out my hands, cover his eyebrows and eyes, and gently soothe his sadness. Now, I don't seem to be qualified to do so. 15. I had no idea where he was going, so I slowly drove around the city in circles. Until Felix woke up. He looked at his watch and looked out the window. "You're not going to drive me around the city like this for almost 2 hours, are you? If I sleep the whole time, are you going to keep driving until dawn?" I was a little tired from driving, and I didn't have the energy to talk to him more. "Are you awake now? Then take a taxi home by yourself. I have a meeting tomorrow morning." The meaning of expulsion is obvious. After a few seconds of silence, Felix put on his glasses again, opened the car door and walked out. I breathed a sigh of relief. "Come out." I didn't expect Felix to come directly to the driver's seat. He opened the car door and looked down at me, his eyes bright and determined. Although it was the middle of the night, there were still a lot of cars hanging around outside. A car owner behind me was unhappy that I was blocking the road and honked his horn frantically. I am a person who doesn't like to cause trouble. I got out of the car, sat in the passenger seat, said "drive" expressionlessly, and closed my eyes, not wanting to pay attention to the people next to me. So late now, and if he wants to drive, just let him drive. After going around the city a few times, it will be daybreak. I might as well get some more sleep now. As I fell asleep in my seat, I heard Felix murmur with a smile, "You still sleep badly." 16. I was awakened by the fragrance. There is always a scent of gardenia lingering in my nose. It seems to smell the same as the ant in my memory. When I woke up, I found myself in Felix's arms, with my whole face buried in his chest. I seemed to be lacking oxygen and my head was dizzy. Woke up. Meeting Felix's smiling eyes, I was so frightened that I almost jumped down. Felix was afraid that I would fall, so he immediately raised his hands and hugged my waist more tightly. "We're almost home, don't move." As soon as I finished speaking, the elevator opened with a ding, and Felix carried me out. He beeped the password a few times, the door opened, and he walked in. Before I could break free, Felix had already put me down and pushed me against the wall, pressing me down with his entire body. My back hit the wall and I cried out in pain. "Felix, are you sick?" He instantly got angry and pressed his legs against me. "Lila, I haven't seen you for a few years, but your temper has gotten worse. Why didn't I see you being so irritable when I was your follower?" I sneered and looked up into his eyes. "Felix, I stopped being your follower 6 years ago. Have you forgotten? You said it yourself. You said you hated me for sticking to you like a stray dog, and then told me to get lost. Why, you want to be a master again, and you need a maid to serve you." "Lila." A low growl scared me so much that my heart skipped a beat. Seeing that my expression was not right, Felix immediately softened his voice. "Sorry, I got a little excited." He restrained his expression but kept his eyes calm. "You were so cruel to just leave when you said you would. Shouldn't you give me an explanation?" I lowered my eyes and smiled bitterly. "What explanation can I give? That place is not my home. I have to live my own life." Felix gritted his teeth and laughed angrily. "Even if you want to stay away from that house, at least tell me. Do you know that I even go to the police station every year to check the missing persons list, just in case I see your name on it? At least you have to let me know that you are still alive and well." As he spoke, Felix's voice became softer and softer, with a slight tremor in it. I finally let out a long sigh. "Sit down and talk slowly." 17. I briefly told Felix how I had been living over the past few years. "It's nothing, it was just a little hard in the beginning. I didn't ask my uncle for money so I could get a loan for my tuition, and my living expenses were barely enough from tutoring and summer jobs. After I got the scholarship, I would occasionally reward myself with a good meal, and my life was pretty decent." But Felix didn't seem satisfied with my answer. He stared at me. "You're avoiding the main point." I laughed. "What do you think I'm avoiding?" "You don't think I'm avoiding you on purpose." His eyes flickered. "Felix, don't be so self-righteous. We didn't have a very good relationship before, but since your aunt has been kind to me, it's my duty to take care of you a little more. As for now, that's all Stella's business." Pushing him away, I walked to the entrance and prepared to leave. "Stella and I are not what you think." He paused. "She and I are actually." "I know." I turned around and looked at him, and the figure in my sight seemed to become blurry. Suddenly, I had a feeling that the thing I had always longed for in my dream appeared. But I no longer had the same obsession as before. I pursed my lips and chuckled. "Actually, I know everything." Felix's pupils dilated, and even through the lenses, I could feel his shocked gaze. "Stella told me everything." Uncle had a serious talk with Felix before the college entrance examination. He told Felix that if he wanted to take everything from him, he had to follow the path he had arranged for him. Otherwise, he wouldn't mind making his illegitimate son the eldest son. My aunt and uncle started from scratch and created the current engine group. How could Felix tolerate an illegitimate child taking away half of his mother's hard work? So he started to get better, started to get back on track, and he wanted to take away what belonged to him. Stella came from a good family, and was the person that Felix's uncle had intended to approach from the beginning. However, he was a dissolute man at that time and didn't take her seriously at all. Felix finds Stella and hopes she can act out a play with him. Stella didn't refuse. In her opinion, at least this was a quick way for her to get closer to Felix. 18. Holding my breath, I relaxed myself. "Felix, you want to know why I left? I'll tell you. I made a deal with my uncle." Felix froze suddenly, shaking his body stiffly. I raised my eyes and smiled with relief. "Do you know why Grandma's grave could be moved here so easily? It's all thanks to Uncle's help." Felix asked me that at the beginning. I lied to him and said that several uncles in my family pooled the money from selling their land and moved my grandmother to the city. "Uncle helped me on the condition that I stay away from you and that home after the college entrance examination. This was not a difficult matter for me, so I agreed immediately." So Felix, you always wanted to know why I left. Is this the answer you wanted to hear? After saying that, I pinched my knuckles tightly, trying to hide the intense pain in my chest. Between my grandma and him, I chose my grandma. So I gave up Felix after all. 19. Felix hung his head, shifting his shoulders slackly, looking miserable. He raised his head, his eyes reddened, and he forced a smile with an inexplicable fondness in his eyes. Lila, you did a great job. I was stunned, my expression was incredulous. I was so bad before, always making you sad, pretending to be so high and mighty, as if no one could understand me, thinking I was so great, but in fact I was just a fool. No one can stand me like that, including myself, so your choice is right. After hearing these words, I didn't know how to digest them for a moment. Obviously Felix hates being abandoned the most. Lila. Felix came over and turned me over so that I was facing him. I indulged myself for 3 years and regret it for 6 years. Now I just want to cherish the future. Would you please come back? I'll be your follower from now on. My eyes were wet and I opened my mouth to speak, but in the end I just shook my head. Felix panicked and squeezed my shoulders. Lila, trust me for once. A ringtone suddenly rang out at an inopportune moment. Seeing the incoming call, Felix frowned but still picked up the call. I don't know what the person on the phone said, but Felix's expression became darker and darker. He cursed shit under his breath, hung up the phone and turned to me and said, "Something needs to happen at the company. You should stay here and have a good rest. That room is clean. If you are hungry, there is food in the refrigerator." After he finished speaking, the hand on my shoulder tightened a little bit, and Felix stared at me. Remember, wait for me to come back. 20. After Felix left, I was planning to leave too. After taking 2 steps, I saw a small bunch of gardenias in a blue gilded vase on the shoe cabinet at the door, and my heart suddenly felt soft. It turns out that he has always been missing his aunt. With a light sigh, I turned around and paced around the room, feeling the traces of Felix's life bit by bit. The house is new, but some of the daily necessities are very old. There is a pair of kitty cat pillows neatly placed on the sofa. It seems that there was a promotion in the store and 2 were available for $39.9. I bought them and put them in the living room, and told Felix that one was his and the other was mine. On the TV background wall, an embroidery picture with the 4 big words "Peace and Joy" was framed on a shelf. This was the first year I came here. I saw the girls in my class were all playing with embroidery, so I went to the store and picked out the largest size. But Felix found out and mocked me for doing useless things. I came here to study, not to have fun. Then I hid the picture I had finished embroidering and was about to give to my aunt back again. My eyes were sore, I shook my head and smiled to hide my emotions, but my heart felt even more sore. With a sigh of relief, I took out a small cloth bag with the word "peace" printed on it from my bag. When it opened, a small pendant necklace woven with black silk thread dangled in the air. Facing the skylight, the white teeth embedded in the jade frame are so bright that they can reflect light. This is Felix's back molar that was knocked out, and I have kept it intact. When I was graduating from my senior year, I found it when I was packing my luggage in the dormitory. After thinking about it, I made it into a pendant and found a street craftsman to engrave the date on it. Then I took it to a temple and asked the abbot to consecrate it. That date is meaningful. It was the first time I heard my own pounding heartbeat. It was also at that moment that it seemed destined that Felix and I would always be 2 parallel lines that would never intersect. I took one last look at it, put it in the vase and left. 21. When I got home, the sky was already turning slightly pale. I was so tired that I asked for a day off from the institute for the first time. Lying in bed, I didn't think about anything and had a very deep sleep. When I woke up, it was already 11 o'clock in the morning. I turned on the radio out of habit. When I heard the word Felix coming from inside, my sleepiness disappeared instantly. I immediately ran to turn up the volume and put my ear close to it. After hearing this, his expression immediately became serious. Felix's company is not in a good state at the moment. No wonder he left in such a hurry yesterday. I took the phone and clicked on the current affairs. A very eye-catching title. Anyang Company is in financial crisis, and the marriage between Felix and Stella may be put on the agenda. Anyang Company is the result of Felix's hard work over the years, but Stella is helping behind the scenes. Stella also told me that her uncle was unhappy with Felix being out of his control and intended to suppress him. Only if he married her would the Luo family be willing to help him with all their strength. But Felix refused to give in and just tried to hold on and get through it. Now Felix's company is in crisis, and his uncle recently brought that woman to a public place, intentionally telling everyone that this is the new mistress of the Lawrence family. I think he was also telling Felix that there would be no good outcome if he went against him. It was not easy for Felix to get back his aunt's shares from him. I opened the address book, stared at the number that seemed covered in dust, pursed my chin and dialed the number. The call was connected, and a man's cold voice came from the inside. His fingers trembled slightly, and I held the phone tightly and said, "Uncle, let's meet." 22. When I set foot in this city again, I felt a strange sense of strangeness in my heart. I have been here for almost 5 years. This is my second visit to Engine Group. The first time was a month after my aunt passed away, and Lawyer Davidson brought me here. At that time, my uncle was still celebrating the birth of his second son with that woman. People in the company also thought that I was just a relative's child brought by Lawyer Davidson, and no one cared. Now when I walk in, no one cares or even ignores me. No matter what I said, the front desk refused to let me in. Although they were about the same age, she had a stern face and her eyes were almost rolled up to the sky. However, when she saw the woman at the door, her face immediately filled with smiles. "Mrs. Lawrence, you're here." When he saw that woman again, his emotions were still in turmoil. Before he could calm down, a violent collision struck him. Severe pain in the toes. "Humph, you stinky woman, you're blocking me." A little boy of 5 or 6 years old stared at me fiercely with his eyes open. Frowning, I looked up. The little boy was stunned for a moment, then pointed at me and shouted to the woman behind him, "Mom, that's the woman in the photo that Felix hid in the room. Why is she so ugly?" The little boy bumped into me quickly again and made a face. "Why are you here, you ugly bastard? This is my territory from now on. Even Felix doesn't dare to come here because he is my defeated opponent." I was shocked that a 5 or 6-year-old could say these words. "Oh, you are the girl that Lawrence's family took in before. Why are you here all of a sudden? Is it because you don't have enough money? Doesn't Joey give you money every year?" Lucy squinted her eyes, with an expression of indescribable contempt. In the past, Felix and I just pretended she didn't exist, but now it's even more impossible for me to have anything to do with her. I walked to the front desk and asked again patiently, "Hello. Please help me contact Director Lawrence again." The front desk clerk always treats people differently based on their situation. At this moment, she completely ignored me and was eager to go up and flatter Lucy. The landline phone just happened to ring. After answering the phone, she said to the person behind her awkwardly, "Director Lawrence said that only Miss Shaw needs to go up to meet him." I nodded, said, "Thank you," and walked into the elevator without looking around. Lucy was so angry that she started to curse. "Why are you so proud? This place will belong to my son sooner or later. Felix will belong to me forever." The door closed, cutting off the noise. I can't guarantee what Felix's life will be like, but I can guarantee that this place does not belong to them. 23. "Felix, I'll give you 2 days to come back and prepare for your wedding with Stella. Otherwise, I'll assume that you'll automatically give up everything here. Don't think I don't know who you met. Our Lawrence family has treated her badly. Over the years, I have given her every penny." I don't know what Felix said, but my uncle was so angry that he threw his phone at the door. After knocking a few times, I pushed the door open, picked up the phone at my feet, walked over and handed it to my uncle with a smile. "Uncle, long time no see." He took it and forced a smile. "Lila, it's been 6 years since we last met. I thought we would never see each other again." I nodded. "Yeah, I thought so too. I didn't come here to reminisce about the past. I just took out a bank card from my bag. This is all the money you've sent me over the past 6 years. I haven't touched a single cent of it. I've kept it all in here." My uncle glanced at it and stared at me with a dim look in his eyes. "Lila, you are being a little immature. This makes your uncle seem like the one who doesn't keep his word." I knew that he was reminding me that since I had made a deal with him, I should be tactful and do my part. But now I am just doing my job. I took out another document from my bag. "Uncle, maybe you don't know, but I had a deal before you did. There should always be a first-come, first-served principle when doing things. I opened the bag and took out the documents. This is the information that my aunt entrusted to a trust company to keep her property 10 years ago. Lawyer Davidson and the people from the trust company will come to tell you the details later. It's actually very simple. Under the supervision of the company's shareholders, we will transfer the foundation that Auntie left to Felix to him in person. When she left the company, my aunt transferred all her shares to a charitable foundation under the company's name as a gift. No one knew that my aunt would give such an important thing to an insignificant outsider. So, Auntie paved the way for Felix very early on. The second before her heart stopped beating, the name she called out was Felix. 24. Uncle frowned and said unhappily, "Lila, when you were with Felix, I thought you were a mean little girl. You always stared at him with malicious eyes. You were so young, but you had bad intentions. That's why I always looked down on you. I didn't expect you to be such a hidden talent. You and your aunt have done so much behind the scenes. But don't forget that I still have a say here." My expression remained calm and I nodded. "You're right. I am a bit mean. After all, your son is so outstanding. Otherwise, I wouldn't be so dark-minded as to deliberately sabotage him when he was being intimate with his girlfriend. Seems like I succeed every time." I nodded again and continued. "Of course, Uncle still has the final say here, but you know how outstanding Felix is. This place will be his sooner or later. Nothing could hold him down now." "What nonsense are you talking about here?" Lucy suddenly rushed in with her child. "In a few days, my Xiaoyan will become the son of the Fu group. What does Felix count for?" I smiled, walked closer to her, and said word by word, "He is nothing. What about your son? A bastard is a bastard and will never be allowed to appear in public." Lucy was so angry that she raised her hand to slap me, but Felix showed up and stopped her. "Lawyer Davidson and his team are here too." "Very good. Let's get everything sorted out today. After hiding for 6 years, I'm tired. With Lawyer Davidson here, there is nothing for me to do here." While there were so many people around, I left quietly. After a round, we finally arrived at the cemetery. The tombstones of my grandmother and aunt have always been kept clean and tidy, and even the sacrificial flowers are still fresh. I know it was Felix who put them there. Every time I came back to worship, I would hide first and wait until Felix left before appearing again. This time I could finally stand in front of them with ease, because I have done everything I promised. 25. When I rushed back overnight, I actually saw Stella. She was waiting for me at the gate of the community. Just remembered, as soon as I got on the high-speed train, I turned off my phone and went to sleep. I opened it and saw dozens of missed calls. Stella saw me and ran over to me. "Lila, do you know where Felix went? I have been unable to contact him, and the people at the company said he went to the company today and has not been heard from since." I glanced at Stella. She must have been so anxious that she didn't even notice that she had put her clothes on inside out. However, for a beautiful girl like her, even if she wears a pair of Inyang socks when going out, others will say that it is fashionable. "Don't worry, he's fine. Are you interested in going up and sitting with him? I just bought a dozen beers." I shook the bag in my hand. I took Stella to the rooftop. This is the best place to see the stars. I pulled her to sit on the ground and drank beer in big gulps. Stella looked at me several times, wanting to say something but stopping herself. It was like going back to that summer when she met me for the first time and wanted me to help her deliver something to Felix. She felt a little embarrassed and a little timid. How come she is still so cute? I opened a can of beer and handed it to her. "Let's drink together. The night is long. Let's talk slowly." Later, I told her everything that happened today. "Lila." Stella suddenly looked at me very seriously. She pressed the can repeatedly with her thumb, and the bottle was slightly deformed. After what seemed like a long time of thinking, she finally said, "I quit. I thought I had done a lot for Felix, but it was nothing. I said I was competing with you fairly, but I took advantage of my family background to take shortcuts. In fact, women like me who are two-faced are the worst." After saying that, she smiled self-deprecatingly and poured the beer into her mouth. This silly girl. I also took a big gulp, and with the help of my slight intoxication, I shook my head vigorously, not knowing whether I was crying or laughing, and said, "You are all good, I am the worst." "Stella, you know what? Actually, I made a deal with my aunt. A real deal. In the beginning. 26. I have been a thoughtful person since I was a child. Even though I agreed to go with my aunt, I was still very wary of her. I know my mother doesn't have a friend like her, and she's unlikely to have one. My aunt obviously felt it, but she wasn't angry and was still very nice to me. On my birthday, she showed me a picture. The photos show outstanding poor students from our county. She pointed at me with big eyes, looking straight at the camera and smiling brightly and said, "I chose you among all these kids at first sight. I don't know why, but I liked you at first sight." She told me a lot that day. She said that she was just following the usual practice of selecting a few children to sponsor in the name of the foundation. But when she thought about her own illness, she couldn't bear to leave her child behind. So she chose me and made me an insignificant person, become a trump card in Felix's hand in the future. She asked me if I was willing, and if I wasn't, there was still time and she could take me home. She provided me with food, clothing, a good education, and helped me take care of my grandmother. Why I don't want to. But what I thought was a simple thing gradually became more and more difficult. If I hadn't fallen in love with Felix, perhaps everything would be much easier. 27. Stella actually doesn't understand. She felt that since Felix and I had feelings for each other, this was nothing. I laughed. Why not? Love with guilt and purpose is not pure. He has it and so do I. If you can't face this love, why force yourself to love? Besides, 6 years is really a long time. Maybe we just have our own regrets. That night Stella and I talked a lot, and I also said, "I'm leaving soon." 28. The day we left, the weather was bad and it started raining. This time the rain did not come as quickly or go away as usual. It sounds more like a slow minor tune. Not so disturbing, with a hint of slow lightness. This time I am flying to another country. The Research Institute had long intended to arrange for me to serve as a resident instructor at a cooperating biological company abroad. It's just that at that time I made excuses that there were important things that had not been completed. Now I took the initiative to mention going. After all, this is a stepping stone for my future career advancement. Of course I have to seize the opportunity. Stella knew I was leaving, so she asked someone to bring me something early in the morning. When I saw the stickers inside, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I drank too much that night and kept praising the cute stickers she had put on her books. Sure enough, the things you miss when you are young will always be hidden in some deep corner. Then one day they suddenly pop out. Stella even called me and asked me if I really didn't plan to tell Felix that I was leaving. I said yes, but the parting words should be left to the day of separation. This time I could tell him calmly that I was leaving. 29. As soon as the call was made, the other party picked up the phone. "Hey Lila. It sounds like Felix is a bit tired. The company's crisis has just been resolved and my aunt's foundation has just been taken over, so he must be very busy. It's just that during this period of time he always likes to call me at night. Sometimes it's too late and I answer the phone, but I'm too sleepy to talk. He just listened quietly to my snoring in my sleep, and when I woke up in the middle of the night, I heard the sound of shuffling documents coming from the phone. Then continue to close your eyelids and go to sleep. Felix seems to enjoy this state and never gets tired of it, doing it every day. But yesterday I didn't answer for the first time. Felix, you probably can't guess where I am now. I didn't mean to tell you this at this time. I just felt that this was the right time to say goodbye." There was silence on the other end of the phone for more than 10 seconds, and the next second the sound of running was heard. The sound of panting and wind filled his ears. Felix mumbled, sounding anxious and scared. "Where are you, Lila? You can't joke like that. I'm already on the plane and it's about to take off. Felix, please stop running. I'm tired of listening to you." The movement over there came to a standstill. "I'm telling you this time, don't blame me for leaving without saying goodbye later." After a few seconds of silence, Felix sighed softly. "Where are you going and when will you be back? I'll tell you first. Anyway, I'll always wait for you no matter where you are." The rain stopped soon, and the golden light shone through the glass, blinding me so much that I couldn't open my eyes. I rubbed my sore eyes and smiled again immediately. My company sent me to work abroad, maybe for 1 or 2 years or maybe for a very long time. I checked and found that the weather there is very good. Not too hot or too humid, but a little cool. Felix, you know I like autumn very much. Maybe because my name contains the word Autumn. In fact, you don't know that I like summer at first. It's bright and sunny, not gloomy at all. But now I don't like it anymore. Summer seems to be a bit painful for both you and me. All my joys and sorrows are in the summer. My goodness begins in summer, and my badness ends in summer. Seems like a good ending. 30. Felix, the plane is about to take off, so I won't say much. Oh, when you have time, remember to change the vase with the gardenias in the entrance. I think white porcelain may be more suitable for it. Okay, bye for now, Felix. After the call ended, I turned off my phone. The plane took off quickly. Looking out the window, the clouds in the sky seemed brighter and the city had become a tiny star. I turned my head and closed my eyes. Now, in a blink of an eye, summer has become a story and autumn has just begun.